Winter did not merely make ancient humans cold, it tried to erase them. Across the Ice Age, temperatures could fall, grasslands could disappear beneath snow, rivers could lock under ice, and animals could move far beyond the horizon. There was no weather forecast, no insulated house, and no emergency truck arriving with blankets. If a group misjudged the season, the punishment was not an uncomfortable weekend. It could be hunger, frostbite, or death. And yet people lived through winters so severe that many of us would struggle to survive a single night in them. They crossed cold steppe, occupied northern Europe, raised children in glacial landscapes, and returned to places where winter came back every year. They did not survive because they were immune to cold. They survived because generations slowly assembled a system in which fire, clothing, shelter, food, movement, and cooperation protected one another. Remove any one part and the whole system became dangerously fragile. The first enemy was not self. It was the steady escape of heat from the human body. Wind strips away the thin layer of warm air beside the skin. Wet material carries heat away quickly, and contact with frozen ground drains warmth through the body. That means a person can become dangerously cold even when the air does not look dramatic. A damp hide, a hard wind, and a long period of exhaustion can be more deadly than a beautiful wall of snow. Ancient people did not need modern physics to learn this. They only needed to notice who stayed warm, who became weak, and which choices were repeated by the survivors. That knowledge probably accumulated through countless small observations. Sleep behind this ridge, not on the exposed slope. Turn the furry side inward in dry cold, but keep the wind away from the seams. Do not place your bedding directly on frozen soil. Bring fuel before darkness, because searching for wood during a storm is an excellent way to become part of the archaeological record. The joke would not have felt especially funny at the time. Fire was one of the most important parts of the system, but it was not a magical shield. Archaeological evidence for fire appears at very old sites, yet the signal of widespread and repeated fire use becomes much clearer from roughly 400,000 years ago. That distinction matters because finding a patch of burned material is not the same as proving that people could create and control fire whenever they wanted. Some groups may have captured flame from natural fires and protected glowing embers for as long as possible. Others eventually learned reliable ways to produce sparks or friction, although the exact history is difficult to reconstruct from objects that usually decayed. Once a group possessed fire, keeping it alive became a daily responsibility. A hearth needed fuel, protection from wind, and someone who noticed when the glow was fading. Large branches could burn slowly through the night, while smaller dry material could revive a weak ember in the morning. Wood was not always available on open glacial steppe, so people also burned bone and whatever suitable vegetation the landscape offered. At some Upper Paleolithic sites, burned bone appears alongside charcoal, showing that fuel could be improvised when trees were scarce. The best hearth was not simply the largest one. A huge open fire consumed fuel quickly and could fill a shelter with smoke. A carefully placed hearth warmed bodies, dried damp material, illuminated work, discouraged some predators, and made food easier to digest. It also extended the usable day. Around the fire, people could repair tools, scrape hides, share information, and prepare for the morning, while the landscape outside became dark and lethal. In that sense, fire produced something almost as valuable as heat, time. But fire created its own problems. Put it too close to a hide wall and the shelter could burn. Block the opening too tightly, and smoke collected around the people who were trying to breathe. Let sparks reach dry bedding, and the warmest place in camp could become the most urgent problem in camp. So the hearth, entrance, sleeping area, and ventilation had to work together. This was practical engineering long before anyone used that name. Fire also helped people manage moisture. Snow melting on hair, clothing, and footwear could turn insulation into a cold, heavy layer. Drying hides near warmth restored some of their usefulness, but overheating leather could damage it. The solution was not to stand directly in the flames, despite what one desperate stick figure might suggest. It was patient maintenance, careful distance, and enough spare material to replace what failed. Clothing was therefore the next defensive wall. Animal hides trap air, and trapped air slows the loss of body heat. Fur can provide even better insulation, especially when it remains dry and is arranged to protect the body from wind. Cut marks on bare foot bones from Schoningen in Germany suggest that people were removing skins around 300,000 years ago. The marks do not preserve a finished coat, but they support the idea that hides were valuable resources rather than accidental leftovers. Making useful clothing required much more than pulling a skin from an animal and wearing it immediately. Fresh hide carries flesh, fat, moisture, and an unforgettable smell. It has to be scraped, stretched, dried, softened, and sometimes treated with fat, smoke, or other materials. If it dries badly, it becomes stiff. If it stays wet, it can rot. If it is cut carelessly, the group may discover that prehistoric fashion also had irreversible mistakes. Early garments may often have been wrapped or draped around the body. That is better than bare skin, but loose coverings allow warm air to escape whenever the wearer moves. Awls, points, and later-eyed needles made closer-fitting garments possible. Bone-eyed needles become especially significant in parts of the Upper Paleolithic, when people were occupying extremely cold regions. With holes placed along hide edges, sinew or plant fiber could pull separate pieces together around arms, legs, hands, and feet. The result was not merely decoration. It reduced gaps where wind could enter and gave people freedom to hunt, gather fuel, carry children, and work outside. Footwear may have been among the most important garments, even though soft shoes rarely survive for archaeologists to find. Feet lose heat against frozen ground, and damaged toes can destroy a person's ability to travel. Wrapped hide, grass stuffing, fur, and layered materials could create a barrier between skin and ice. The principle was simple: keep the foot dry, trap air, and replace crushed insulation. The execution probably involved a great deal of adjusting, tying, and quietly regretting that one loose strap. Clothing also had to match activity. A person walking uphill while carrying meat produces far more heat than someone sitting still beside a hunting blind. Too little insulation risks hypothermia, but too much during hard work creates sweat that later becomes dangerous. Experienced groups would have learned to open, remove, rearrange, and dry layers as conditions changed. The best winter outfit was not one perfect coat. It was a flexible system of pieces that could be managed throughout the day. Even excellent clothing cannot replace shelter during a long storm. Caves are famous in stories about prehistoric people, but caves were never available everywhere, and many were damp, exposed, occupied by animals, or poorly positioned for food and water. Humans therefore used rock shelters, windbreaks, tents, huts, and other structures built from local material. Wooden poles, branches, hides, turf, grass, and bone could turn a small area into a much warmer microclimate. The goal was not to heat the entire ice age. It was to control a few cubic meters of air. Location mattered before construction even began. A shelter behind a ridge could escape the strongest wind. A south-facing position in the northern hemisphere could receive more sunlight. Nearby water, fuel, animal routes, and dry ground reduced the amount of energy spent on daily survival. A beautiful cave several hours from food might be less useful than an ordinary overhang beside a reliable route. Ancient real estate had only one important review. Did everyone wake up? The shape of a shelter controlled how air moved. Low entrances reduced direct wind, compact interiors preserved body heat, and layers of hide or vegetation slowed heat loss. Some later northern dwellings used floors below ground level, where surrounding earth added insulation. In carefully designed cold-weather homes known from Arctic peoples, a lower entrance passage can collect cold air beneath the occupied space. We should not assume every Paleolithic shelter used the same design, but the physical principle would have been available wherever people experimented with height, openings, and airflow. Bedding was another quiet technology. A person lying directly on stone or frozen soil loses heat continuously into the ground. Grass, reeds, brush, hides, and fur create insulating layers by trapping air and separating the body from that cold surface. Bedding also had to remain dry and relatively free of pests. It was not glamorous, but a thick sleeping layer could matter as much as the flames a few steps away. In the upper Paleolithic landscapes of Eastern Europe, people sometimes built remarkable circular structures using mammoth bones. One structure at Kostinki, in present-day Russia, dates to roughly 25,000 years ago and contained charcoal, burned bone, stone debris, and other signs of human activity. Researchers debate the exact functions and duration of occupation at such sites, so they should not be imagined automatically as cozy, permanent houses. Still, mammoth bones could provide a strong framework in a treeless environment, probably combined with hides or other perishable covering. The structure itself reveals planning, labor, and the ability to organize heavy material on a large scale. Shelter, however, was useless if the people inside slowly starved. Winter reduced plant foods, shortened daylight, changed animal behavior, and increased the calories required to stay warm. Cold-adapted humans could burn enormous amounts of energy while walking, hunting, carrying loads, and maintaining body temperature. Some estimates for Neanderthals reach several thousand calories per day, with particularly high demands under harsh conditions. Exact numbers depend on body size, activity, climate, and assumptions, but the central problem is certain. Winter survival was expensive. Meat supplied protein, but protein alone could not safely provide unlimited energy. Humans need fat and, when available, carbohydrates as well. Late winter animals can become lean after spending months consuming their own reserves. A hunter might therefore return with a large carcass and still face an energy shortage if the meat contained too little fat. Marrow, brains, organ tissue, and fatty areas were valuable not because ancient people were being dramatic, but because calories hidden inside bones could determine whether the meal truly sustained them. Breaking long bones to reach marrow appears at many archaeological sites. The work required stones, skill, and an understanding of which bones held the best return. Fat could also be rendered from crushed bone by heating it with water, although evidence and techniques vary across time and place. Nothing useful was casually dismissed when winter had turned the landscape into an empty pantry. The skeleton was not merely waste. It could be food, fuel, raw material, and construction supply. Hunting strategies changed with the season. Animals migrated, gathered in different places, or became easier to track in snow while also becoming more dangerous to approach. People needed knowledge of valleys, river crossings, sheltered grazing areas, and the timing of herds. A successful hunt could feed many people, but failure cost precious energy. Every chase was a calculation between possible calories and calories already being burned. Small animals, fish, stored plants, and other foods could diversify that risk where environments allowed them. Winter diets were not identical across Eurasia, and neither Neanderthals nor Homo sapiens ate one universal menu. Dental calculus and other evidence show that plant use occurred among Neanderthals, even though meat often dominated the surviving chemical signals at colder sites. Local ecology decided what was possible. The smartest winter strategy was usually not loyalty to one food but flexibility before the easiest food disappeared. Planning ahead transformed autumn abundance into winter security. Meat could be dried, smoked, frozen, or stored in cold places, depending on temperature, humidity, animals, and available technology. Nuts, roots, seeds, and other plant foods could also be collected when present and preserved in ways that left little archaeological trace. Direct evidence for ancient food caches is uncommon because pits, baskets, wooden racks, and the food itself often decay or are emptied. That absence makes precise claims difficult, but storage is a well-supported strategy among many later hunter-gatherers facing seasonal shortages. It is reasonable to treat planning and preservation as part of the solution while remaining cautious about exactly when each method appeared. Storage also invited thieves. Carnivores, rodents, insects, moisture, and other humans could convert months of work into a very brief disappointment. Food had to be raised, buried, covered, watched, divided among locations, or kept close enough to defend. A single cache was efficient until something found it. Several smaller stores reduced the chance of losing everything at once, though they also demanded memory and travel. Winter rewarded the group member who remembered which rock was important and punished the one who said, "It was definitely somewhere around here." Mobility was just as important as storage. Ancient people were not randomly wandering until a warm cave appeared. Many hunter-gatherers moved through familiar territories, returning to places where water, fuel, stone, prey, and shelter were predictable in a particular season. Summer camps and winter camps could serve different purposes. Travel itself remained risky, but moving at the right time prevented a group from being trapped in a landscape after its resources vanished. This required a mental map far larger than the camp. People had to remember passes blocked by snow, rivers that froze safely or dangerously, valleys where animals gathered, and distant sources of good stone. They also needed information from neighboring groups. Stories about routes and storms were not entertainment alone. They were survival data carried in human memory. The body contributed to cold survival, but it did not make technology optional. Neanderthals had relatively broad trunks, heavy bodies, and shorter lower limbs than many recent humans. Compact proportions reduce surface area relative to body mass and can help conserve heat. Reconstructions also indicate powerful bodies with high energy requirements. In other words, the same build that helped retain warmth also demanded a large and reliable supply of calories. Evolution rarely hands out a benefit without sending an invoice. The Neanderthal face has also been studied as a possible cold weather adaptation. Computer simulations suggest that Neanderthal and modern human nasal passages could condition inhaled air efficiently. Although the details are more complicated than the old claim that one large nose was simply a radiator. Air must be warmed and humidified before reaching delicate tissues, especially in cold, dry climates. Facial anatomy helped, but it could not sew a boot, build a wall, or keep a fire alive. Modern humans entering high-latitude Europe around 45,000 years ago also faced cold steppe conditions. Their success cannot be explained by one superior gene or one miraculous invention. They carried combinations of clothing technology, tools, social networks, flexible diets, and planning. Different human populations solved similar problems in different ways, borrowed useful ideas, and sometimes failed despite doing many things correctly. The Ice Age was not an intelligence test with a guaranteed passing score. Cooperation may have been the strongest layer of insulation. One person could collect fuel while another repaired clothing. Skilled hunters could bring food to children, injured adults, and older people who carried knowledge that was difficult to replace. Several bodies sleeping near one another produced heat, while shared watch kept fire and predators under observation. A group could move a mammoth bone, raise a shelter frame, defend a carcass, and care for someone whose damaged foot made solitary survival impossible. Archaeological evidence shows that some injured prehistoric individuals survived serious trauma for long periods. We cannot reconstruct every act of care, but survival with severe impairment often implies food sharing, protection, or help with movement. During winter, that support was not sentimental decoration around the real survival story. It was the real survival story. A community that protected knowledge and recovered its injured members preserved skills it would need in the next crisis. Children also transform the problem. They lose heat more quickly than large adults and cannot travel, hunt, or regulate clothing with the same independence. Keeping them alive required extra food, carrying, shelter, supervision, and patient teaching. Yet every child who learned where to find fuel, how to recognize weather, and how to repair a covering became part of the group's future resilience. Knowledge survived winter by living inside people. Not every winter strategy worked. Hearths went out, hunts failed, storms lasted longer than expected, and stored food spoiled or vanished. People became wet, injured, separated, or trapped. Entire camps may have been abandoned, and some groups undoubtedly died without leaving evidence archaeologists can easily recognize. Survival should never be confused with comfort or certainty. We see the descendants of those who succeeded, which can make success appear more inevitable than it was. This is why the popular idea that ancient humans simply hibernated is so attractive. It offers one dramatic answer to an extremely complicated problem. A controversial study of human fossils from Cima de los Huesos proposed that seasonal metabolic disruption might explain certain bone lesions. But humans are not natural hibernators. The skeletal evidence has other possible explanations, and the hypothesis remains heavily debated. There is no solid basis for picturing whole Paleolithic communities sleeping peacefully through winter like bears. Real survival required far more work. The work began long before the first snowfall. Hides had to be prepared, tools repaired, routes chosen, shelters secured, fuel gathered, and food acquired while the landscape still allowed it. When winter arrived, every item represented time borrowed from an earlier season. A dry boot carried the labor of hunting, skinning, scraping, piercing, sewing, and maintenance. A meal carried knowledge of animals, terrain, preservation, and sharing. A warm sleeping place carried construction, fuel, bedding, and cooperation. So what were the crazy tricks that defeated the deadliest winters? There was no single trick. Ancient humans survived by building layers of protection, with each layer compensating for the weakness of another. Clothing kept heat near the skin, shelter blocked wind, bedding stopped the ground from stealing warmth, fire dried material and extended the day. Stored food bridged failed hunts, movement followed resources, and cooperation kept the entire machine working. Their true advantage was not toughness alone. It was the ability to plan together, learn from failure, and turn fragile materials into a living environment. Winter helped shape humans into engineers of their own survival. Not engineers with blueprints, metal tools, or perfectly straight walls. Engineers with memory, stone, bone, hide, fire, and the urgent motivation provided by freezing air. Every safe night was a small victory assembled from hundreds of decisions, and when spring finally returned, the people walking out of those shelters carried more than relief. They carried knowledge ready for the next winter. Thank you for watching. If this journey into Ice Age survival helped you see ancient humans differently, leave a like and subscribe to Ancient Origins. And the next time your heater takes 10 seconds to warm up, remember that your ancestors once had to negotiate personally with a pile of damp wood. They would probably consider your thermostat a supernatural artifact.